Okay, so good evening everyone, et bonsoir à toutes et à toutes, and welcome to tonight's session of OTF Connects titled Bring Your Own Device in Primary and Junior Grades. Yes, you can. Presented by Vicki Morgado. We have a relatively small group tonight with mostly new participants, and I would like to welcome you all to OTF Connects. Vicki is also new to OTF Connects. It's going to be her very first session. The advantage of small groups is that it allows sessions to be more interactive, a bit more informal, and Vicki has actually prepared a particularly interactive session tonight, so I think it's going to be extremely exciting. Et comme d'habitude, je voudrais profiter de l'occasion pour souhaiter la bienvenue à nos collègues franco-ontariens. Cette session est en anglais, mais si vous désirez obtenir des informations en français, surtout n'hésitez pas à nous contacter par la suite. So we are definitely thrilled to have each and every one of you with us tonight. And as I said, most of you are actually from Toronto, except for Tandis. I think it's definitely a pleasure to welcome you and also to welcome Vicki Morgado for this session. Vicki is a teacher and leader and presenter who has been teaching for 17 years. She has worked as a classroom teacher as well as a technology coach. She's currently teaching grade 3 and tries to teach students to become agents of change in her classroom, as well as being creative, innovative, and critical thinkers. I think it will be interesting to get her perspective tonight on the issue of using electronic devices in the classroom. I know that some teachers ban them entirely, while others make great use of new technologies. So I certainly look forward to her presentation. I think it's going to be extremely interesting. You can learn more about Vicki by visiting her website, and she's also an avid Twitter user. I don't know if you say Twitter, I don't know. And I will post the link to her website as well as her Twitter handle in the chat box if you wish to visit these websites at your leisure later on. So that's it. At this point, without further ado, I'm going to pass the microphone to Vicki and let her keep introducing herself and share her experience with us. So Vicki, yeah, okay, feel free, perfect. You remembered your talk button, so that's great. So go ahead, I'm going to put myself off. So go ahead with your presentation. I'm going to put myself off, but I'll jump back in if you need me at any point.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. Welcome, and thanks for coming this evening. As Michelle said, I'm pretty involved on Twitter, so here's my contact information. I have 2 handles. The top one is my professional handle, so I use it as the voice is much more of a teacher voice. The handle below is my classroom handle, so if you're a classroom teacher, that's a good handle to follow. And also, you'll see some of the things that we're learning in our class, and I'll be using some examples in today's presentation from that Twitter handle as well. So I just want to take a moment, and if you could introduce yourself, maybe tell us what grades you teach or what your current role is. And as Michelle said in the introduction, if you were with us, you can do that in 2 ways. One is there's a toolbar on the left-hand side, and there's an A, which is the 4th box down. And you can click on that, and it's anonymous, and you can type in the box in the white area. And the other way is like Candace has done, just below in the box. That will give me an indication of sort of where to take the conversation tonight. So welcome. So we have a lot of different experience and a lot of different grades, which is great. And hopefully as Michelle said, it's going to be very interactive, so please feel free to participate and share throughout the presentation. That will just enrich it for everyone. So using the poll feature, and again, you can just put it in the chat box if you feel more comfortable. I'd like you to share what is your experience with implementing BYOD. So the way that you can do that is you can, using the last box on common symbols, when you the last box of clip art, you can use a check mark, and you can drag that out and put it, I just use it as an example, to what is your experience with using and implementing BYOD with your students?
So you have the choice. You can either click on the little A, which is next to the raise hand icon. There's a little A, and then you can select A, B, C, or D. As I can see, some of you are already putting symbols on the screen, so you have the two options. Either would work fine.
So it looks like, for the most part, we have no experience, but we're excited to learn, and then we have a little bit of some familiarity and limited familiarity. So I want you to try and take a moment and try and put yourselves into your students' shoes with technology. And to do that, I found this Canadian video from CBC on basically the internet according to kids. Michelle will post the link in the box, and I'm going to give you a couple minutes to view the video. And as you finish watching it, if you want to put down your thoughts, your feelings, your thinking about the video into the box below, you can do that, and we'll touch base, I guess, in a couple minutes when people have finished watching it. It looks like some people have had a chance to watch the video, and I found it hysterical. It's difficult for our students to understand life without the internet, and when I tell them that I grew up and when I was a kid we didn't have the internet, they're like shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, Mrs. Morgado, what did you do? How did you live? So I think it's a really good indication that for some of us, for these students, that it is a big part of their lives, and it's a very powerful tool when it can be used in the classroom when leveraged properly. And to ignore that part of their lives in society, I think we're really missing out on a really powerful opportunity. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So coming into this session, I'm sure that you have questions or comments or concerns regarding BYOD. And again, just if you can take a moment and you can use them with the chat tool in the box or on the screen, whatever you're more comfortable with. We'll take a moment to get either a question or a comment or concern you have at this point.
And again, if you want to write on the whiteboard, you select the fourth icon, the one that looks like a little A, and you can write directly on top of the white screen. Or for people that are on an iPad like Candice, you can write in the chat box instead. Or any of you actually can choose to write in the chat box if you prefer.
There's some really good concerns coming up, not enough access, poor internet, how to keep students on task, student digital and ethical concerns as well. These are all things we're going to talk about in the session and address. So we're going to move on now to the next slide. And I think primary division is the perfect opportunity to really start building this foundation of seeing their device as a learning tool and not just a toy. And we have an easier job than some of our colleagues will in intermediate and senior. I'm going to talk a little more about that, but that is probably the first part of when the devices come into the room, is that the students need to understand that at home they use this tool probably to watch videos and play games, but at school it's like their textbook. It's like it's like a educational device, and that's a transition that needs to happen first. And I'll often joke with teachers after I do this session that even if you do nothing with the device and you allow students to bring them into the room and it just sits on their desk and they can continue to listen to you and learn and partake in other activities without being tempted to be on that device, that is progress. And there's many adults that can't do that, and many students in the older ages. So I think that the primary division is really a great opportunity for students to learn to self-regulate with their devices. The first part of starting off the journey, though, is definitely digital citizenship. And I would say before even the devices come into the room, I like to build this solid foundation of digital citizenship. I call it classroom management for 21st century or next generation learning, which is the term we're using now. So just like we teach students in the first few weeks routines, and we lay out classroom norms and agreements for our classroom to run smoothly for the rest of the year, I like to do the same with technology. So we will watch videos and we will read books around privacy and internet safety and digital etiquette and how to be respectful online and have conversations around that we are the same person online that we are in real life, and that how to balance the use of technology, and that we need to do other things, and it's not always about technology. And also just when you're downloading apps onto their own devices, you know, reading those privacy agreements and understanding that we're giving privileges to those apps to be on. This is something, this picture that I co-designed with my students, which is success criteria around BYOD. So after having conversations, we came up with a list of, basically it says PEDs, which is personal electronic devices, which is what the term we use in our board, around personal electronics and discussion. So I think this is a really important piece that needs to be done. And I'm always amazed at even how much the students know at such a young age and how much schema they actually bring into the classroom, because again, they've grown up in this digital age. And this is another example. This is from this year. Actually, we read some books and we had some conversations, and then we came up with a list of ways to be safe on the internet. And this was generated with the students, and we posted in the hallway so that it's a constant reminder, not just for my students, but I'm also trying to educate the students that are walking down the hall and create that atmosphere and that create that knowledge as well for the other students. So my students are in part helping to teach as well, those students. And we also talk a lot about copyright. So just last week we were blogging and we were talking about attribution and copyright. Again, these are, you know, if you're going to borrow a picture or music, you need permission. And it's something like classroom management that we're constantly working on. It's not just something I do in September. As issues come up and as situations arise, we come back to this and it's reinforced. And a lot of that is role modeling as well as an educator. You know, digital citizenship is just like classroom management. It's modeling, repetition, feedback, ongoing, so they can learn from their mistakes and they can get better at it. And again, providing that opportunity at a young age really, I think, sets them on a great path as they get older to be respectful and to be digital leaders. And if we don't teach at an early age, I question when will we learn these skills and how will they learn these skills. So just something to consider. So another thing to consider is before you invite the devices to come into your classroom, how are you going to manage them? And my experience in primary and working with primary educators is what you're going to see is mostly tablets and iPads and iPods. It's rare, in my experience, for students to bring in laptops or cell phones, although that could change as time passes. Junior students, you'll start to see more cell phones, and intermediates tend to be mostly smartphones coming into the classroom. So I want you to think about how would you manage those devices into your room. And again, if you can use the text feature, which is the fourth box down where the A is, to type in what suggestions you would offer, or if you feel more inclined, you can also type in the chat feature. So I'm seeing lots of different examples, and please continue to share out your ideas. I don't think there's one right way to manage devices. I think it really depends on your students and your comfort level. And I know that some people might have policies as well that have been, the district advises you. However, my experience has been I'd like to let the students manage the devices themselves. And the reason it comes down to self-regulation for devices and students learning how to be responsible for their own things. If I make them lock it up or if I check them in at the door, it puts the responsibility on me, which my preference is I really don't want that responsibility. And I feel like I take a little bit away from the learning from the students when I do that. Because ultimately, as they grow up, they're going to have to learn to regulate with their devices, and they're going to have to learn to balance that and know when to turn it on and when to turn it off. Now, having said that, not all students might be ready for it. Some might need some intervention, some might need some discussion, etc. But I do work in a responsive design classroom, so I don't have formal desks. I have tables. Students move around a lot. They choose their own seating when they come in the morning. And my students are in grade 3, and they keep their devices generally in their book boxes or on their desks. And I lock the room at recess so that when we leave, or if we leave the room, they're fairly safe, and I let them know that they are ultimately responsible for their devices. And I've been doing this for about 4 years successfully, and I found it has worked really well. They generally treat their devices with respect because when they leave and go home, that device is now a toy to play games and watch videos, etc. And my experience has shown me that they generally take better care of their own devices than they do school devices. I haven't had too many problems, but I will get into some of the challenges around that. And if the student forgets their device, they will often come back running to school because, again, that device is now a toy in the evening. It's not necessarily being used the same way as it is at school. So 3 tips for using BYOD, because this is definitely where you want to start with students, is definitely consider digital citizenship first, and it's an ongoing process. It's not something, again, that it's just done in September and not revisited, particularly as situations come up. And often there's stories in the media, I find, that really are great discussion pieces as well to bring into the classroom, so that's something else as well. Digital management we talked about, so you have to consider how you're going to manage those devices and what's going to work best for you and what your comfort level is. And then the third one is don't be afraid to fail or co-learn with your students. Michelle has posted a link to blog posts with specific details more on these tips, so you can come back to them. I wrote the blog post to expand on some of the ideas that I have here. The first two we've spoken about, and the third one, I always tell my students that FAIL stands for First Attempt in Learning, which I found on Twitter years ago. And just tying into that whole growth mindset piece that as educators, I'm sure we've heard a lot of. And I also feel like we need to model this for our students as well. So using our devices for educational purposes and showing and sharing that out. And sometimes letting our students share with us what they know. And look, they have a lot of experience. Some of them are very tech savvy, and they can teach us as well and being comfortable with that. And when it comes to BYOD, they often know their devices better than we do, so it is important to put yourself in that co-learning stance. And when things don't go as planned or don't work out, realize that that's okay. That's definitely happens. It happens to me all the time, and it's great learning. And it's good for them to see us struggle, and it's good for them to see how we problem solve and we move on, and they begin to do that as well. So when I started on this journey, I realized that parents don't always understand how we're using our devices at school. Their experience as a parent is they see their child often playing games or watching YouTube videos, and they think that their device will be a distraction in class. So I drafted this letter, which I'll ask Michelle to post in the chat, which will give you some time, and I'll give you some time to read it. But it provides specific examples of how we use the device, and it offers tips. And in addition, when you open it, I encourage you to hit Make File, make a copy on the letter. If you want to keep a copy for yourself, if you have a Google Drive, it will save to your device. So you have an access to it, and that way you can use it yourself in your classroom, you can modify it, you can change it. And if you have any trouble or you don't have Google Drive, you can find a copy on my blog, which Michelle will post at the end of the session. Or please feel free to reach out to me afterwards, after the webinar, and I can send you a copy. So I'll give you a minute or two to read it now. And after a couple minutes, if you have any questions or as you're reading it, please feel free to put it into the chat. But I think it's important to be transparent with parents so that they support you in this BYOD journey. And so the first year I didn't hand out this letter, and we did have the agreement form that the parents signed, and then I had a lot of questions. And now I find when I hand this letter out, those questions are minimal. And the other thing is, if you have an during open house, you could have the parents participate in a BYOD activity such as a Kahoot, such as a Nearpod, which we'll talk about some resources that you can use in the classroom. And that's why I like to use Twitter to do this, to show that there are platforms we are using and show examples of how we're using BYOD in the classroom. So I'll just give you a minute to take a look at the letter, and if you have any questions, you can post those out.
Megan's in here too.
Hi, it's Michel here. I just pasted the letter in Blackboard for those of you who were not able to access it. So it will now be part of the recording, and you will all receive an email tomorrow with the recording and all the links, but no, this letter is part of the recording. Okay, so I think that we're about ready to resume. Vicki, okay, you can go ahead. Thanks.
Thanks. So we're going to talk a little bit about successes of using BYOD. So definitely student engagement is one of the biggest for me. It's interesting how you can have the same activity to do on paper, and then digitally the students get very excited about it. and it could be the same task, but it's just having that device. However, there are many things that you can do digitally that you cannot do on paper, and we'll talk a little bit about both of those. I think another big feature is differentiation, particularly for our exceptional learners. And so when you have your own device, you can cater that device to have tools that work for you. And learning that and providing those examples are a wonderful way to differentiate and just empower our learners. So there's other ones such as just, obviously you can meet curriculum expectations. There's the new ISTE standards which just came out, which is the International Society for Technology Educators, which are the global standards as well that it meets. Digital balance is huge. So students learning how to use their devices and when is the best opportunity to use those devices, and understand that we don't need to be on our devices all the time, and creating that balance, I think, is something that we're going to see a lot more of. And as devices become and are increasingly more important even in our lives as adults. So finding that balance and knowing that it's important to get outside is another success. And in modeling that in the early ages, again, I think it sets them up for success as you get older. Documentation of student learning. I'm going to provide some in-class examples of that, as well as student voice. And we're also going to talk a little bit about assessment as for and of learning with some of the tools. And again, I think it's really modeling and teaching these digital citizenship skills for our students. And at a young age, I think this is easier to do than as they get older and they might develop some habits that maybe aren't the best habits that they're displaying, that we're seeing in some of our older students, and I think that's why the ban is that we're seeing schools and banning them as well. But there are challenges. It is definitely not perfect, and probably one of the biggest challenges is equity. And equity, I believe, is probably one of the biggest challenges at the moment. I'd say for myself, I have about 70% of my students bringing in devices daily. Last year was about 85, and I work in a school where the students do have access, and I'm lucky, and that is not necessarily the norm. And as I've noted in the letter that we discussed earlier, I get around that by trying to provide devices that the school has so students are not left out. The other thing I do is I have students work in groups. So today we were doing a Kahoot, and we did a Halloween Kahoot, and we worked in groups so that the students all were participating. I also know some school boards have gone the route of subsidizing costs for purchase of devices to allow students to sign them, or allowing students to sign out devices. So these are all ways that we can help address the issue. And as well as devices are definitely coming down in price. Parents will often say, what device should I buy? And I never answer. I say, listen, they don't need the latest, greatest device, but I do suggest a very strong case to protect it, and that is something that is also to be considered. And as well, there is the digital management piece. So I've had students who do forget their devices, and I've had to have them locked up in the main office until the next day. Although I would say that's maybe happened 3 times in the last 5 years that I can remember. As I said, most students, that is the one thing, they will forget their lunch bag but not their device. I've also had to ensure I keep the doors locked at all times, and the fact that students can be off task is definitely a challenge. From my experience, it has not happened often in primary, as I've seen in more junior intermediate levels. And again, I think a lot of that comes down to a digital citizenship piece and continually working on it. So I'll conference with students if there's a problem and I need to talk to parents. If I need to talk to parents, I will, and make sure I'm having those conversations. And again, role modeling this for our students as educators when we're using our own devices around them. We've also had students who sometimes, they'll forget to bring their device. So today we only had about 6 devices in class, and so they won't always remember to bring them every day. And one tip is some teachers have students maybe bring them only on certain days when they need them. So that's another option as well that you might want to consider. And it's sort of a gradual release of responsibility, and that way see how it goes with the devices having their own. I personally like having them bring them every day. And that's just to build that routine, which I find easier with my primary students, as well as sometimes I just come up with this great idea, like trying a Kahoot, and if we have some extra time, I might come up with this great idea, and if the devices aren't there, I can't necessarily build on that. And also just building in that self-regulation piece we talked about. There's many days where we do not use the devices, but again, they're learning how to have it on their desk and not be tempted to be on it all the time. As well, Wi-Fi, depending on where you teach, could definitely be a challenge, and that is something as well that is definitely something that will and might happen. So we're going to look at some specific examples of classroom uses of BYOD. As I'm talking about them, I know Michelle is going to put in some links to them, and that way you can explore them. The first one is one of my students using his device to document the mathematical process of communication in mathematics with three-dimensional shapes after he built the structure. And what is nice about having them use their device is that their learning gets shared at home with parents or guardians. So for example, today, or sometimes when we're doing projects, they'll say to them, you know, you can take pictures with your device and you can share that at home with your family. I also, this particular one, the first link, I had this student airdrop his communication piece to my device, so I had a copy for myself. The second example is a student using his own dictionary app that he used at home to help with writing. So this is that differentiation piece we were talking about. And he came up to me and said, do you mind if I use my dictionary app? And I said, oh, what's the dictionary app? And he showed it to me, and I'd never heard of it. I said, this is great. And I said, absolutely, you can most definitely use it as a tool in the classroom. The third link is an example of using a Kahoot as an exit ticket during a lesson, and we'll talk more about what a Kahoot is. I know it's come up a little bit in the chat already, and there are also many platforms which we're going to explore as well. But what I love about using technology is like a Kahoot or a Nearpod is that it gives the students that instant feedback on how they're doing. And I can often save these files into my files, my teacher files as well, and take a look at it later, which simplifies the marking process for me and gives me the feedback as well, but more importantly, it gives that student that feedback instantaneously on how they're doing. And then the fourth example is reading ebooks. Local libraries and even most school board libraries now have them. So I teach my students in class how to access these ebooks, and I give them the opportunity to read them at school during silent reading time. And I think this is something we're going to see more of. I know my own son, he's 10 and he just got a Kobo and he absolutely loves it and he's always on it. What's interesting is I've asked my classes last year and this year if they prefer paper books and ebooks, and most of them prefer paper books. So, but we're still reading both. And I let them choose, and I'm teaching them both options. And the fifth piece is probably the most common use of BYOD, which I'm seeing in classrooms now, which is allowing students to do research for their inquiry-based projects. And again, there's a lot of teaching that has to go into this. I've been working with my students this year so far on how to do a proper search, discussions around reliability of sources and cross-referencing. Particularly fake news is definitely another lesson that needs to be addressed. Because my students are very young, I often start with modeling how to do this, and we work together, so it's that gradual release of responsibility. And then we work in partners or in groups, and then eventually on our own until we're ready as we learn these skills. So I'll give you a few minutes to explore these links that Michelle has posted in the chat, and if you have any questions, again, you can put them in the chat and respond to them.
Hi, Jenny. This is Michelle speaking. I just want to let you know that your microphone is on, and so we can hear the background noise a little bit. Thanks so much. And we're going to resume in about 20 seconds.
So we're also another way that you can use your devices is for homework. And I'm not a big proponent of homework, but I like to have some at-home extension activities. And so, for example, this evening we were looking at patterning, and I said I want you to see if you can find some examples of patterning in your homes. And the students, I said, just write the examples down in your agenda, but if you prefer, you could use your device to photograph some examples as well. And then I showed them actually the second link, and Michelle will post the links to these videos. So in the first example, I asked the students, we were looking at liter, what's a liter or half a liter in their homes, and write down examples, but rather than just write them down, if you want to use your device to take pictures or document this, you can, and then bring it in, and I'll share that out on my projector on my smartboard. And the students took it to an entirely new level. So it's amazing what some of them came up with again. And they were very excited to do this. So the first one is an example of a student doing a lesson on capacity. And the second example was looking for angles in our house. And they basically used iMovie to document their learning and what they found. Now today, for example, I had one student say, like, I don't have an iPad, can I use this tool? And again, absolutely, you can differentiate, use whatever tool you want. If you want to document that with Minecraft, or if you want to show that with Adobe Voice or Adobe Spark, or whatever tool it is that you have on your device that you feel inclined to demonstrate that, that the creativity really came out. So I'll give you, again, just a minute to explore these links and post any questions or thoughts that you have in the chat box. So Jill had a really good question around if I give specific types of apps or guide them, or if I leave it up to the students. And with today, for example, I showed the video, and then the students were like, oh, they used iMovie. And so that app came up as an option, and then another student said, can I use this app instead? So I usually let the students decide how and they want to show that, and if they are looking for suggestions, rather than say you should download this app, or I tend to say, let's see what your device has. Now what sometimes happens is when we use our classroom devices or our school devices, so for example Chatterpix is on there, which is a program where you can take a picture, draw a line across something, and you can make it talk. They'll love that app, and then they'll go home, and one of the things we talk about is they should not be downloading apps without parental permission, and they will go home and ask for it. So if it happened this year with QR codes, which we're going to get into in a couple slides, that we've been using a lot of QR codes in the class, and so the student went home and asked permission and was all excited about the QR code reader. So that definitely does tend to happen. And it is tempting to over-guide students. I can totally relate to that experience, Joe, because I think we all have our favorites and our biases. So it's definitely tricky to toe that line for sure. The other way that you can use your devices is the scavenger hunt. So I'm sure a lot of our primary junior teachers, you have them go around the school and looking for 3D shapes or 2D shapes or angles, and we write them down. Well, you know, using the cameras on all of these devices is most devices have access to a camera is great. So this is an example where we went around the school looking for examples of 3D shapes and taking pictures with our devices. And then what we did is we went into Microsoft Sway, and I made it collaborative so that the students could drop their pictures in and then say what the 3D shape was they found. So it was sort of a diagnostic or an assessment for learning activity. So just being creative and thinking around, okay, we've all got a camera, what can we use for that? Even a self-assessment. Maybe I hold a camera with our junior students, having them videotape themselves and then watch themselves talking about a concept and self-assessing them is a really powerful tool as well. So that's something for sure that can be tapped into and very easy to use. The other one is QR codes. So this is an example of a board that I have at the back of my classroom. And I created this board with websites for students to go to when they're done working. But I also use a lot of QR codes to send students to web pages quickly or to do assessments. So like a Google form or a a Microsoft form, which we'll talk about as well. So it's especially for those of you that are in kindergarten or grade 1. If you're trying to get students to go to a website, it can be a very long, tedious, activity for them. But teaching them how to use their QR code scanners and just scan it will take them directly to those web pages. So that is a great tool to have. I did an activity at the start of the year with the students, 2 truths and a lie, which some of you are probably familiar with, where you have 2 things that are true about yourself and one of them that's a lie, and you have to choose. So the students typed them up, and then the answer was the QR code. So they created their own QR codes. I taught them how to do that using the QR code creator. And that was how you would solve to see if the person's what the lie was. And we posted these up all in the hallway for open house. And again, it was to encourage parents to see how we were using technology and how we were using our devices. And then I said, make sure you bring your devices to open house so you can scan them and your parents can play along and find out and figure out what the 2 truths and a lie are. And it was very successful. So this is a great board, and I keep adding to it as I find better websites and more activities, and I get tips from other educators. So that's also a great tool to use. So we're going to get into some of my favorite technological tools to use with BYOD, but the key is essentially web-based platforms. One of my favorites is Nearpod for some of the reasons that I've listed there. And I do frequently use Nearpod. It's an interactive presentation and assessment tool that can be used in the classroom. There is an app for it, but the students don't need the app. As a teacher, you can create presentations that can contain quizzes, polls, videos, images, drawings, web content, and so on. It's also wonderful for assessment and differentiation. And you don't have to start from scratch to create your lessons. They have a library full of lessons already created for you, and they're really well written by other educators, including a series of ELL lessons. I have one here you can try that also contains VR, virtual reality, and I'll ask Michelle again to put the link in to give you time to explore it on your own. There's 2 ways that you can launch a Nearpod. You can have it so that if basically the students will go on, and as you are moving the slides, it will automatically move the slides on the student device. You can also have what I've inserted here is a student-led lesson, which you can explore now. And they've also recently added a neat collaborative feature, which kind of functions a lot like a Padlet. So I'll give you some time now to explore, and you can ask any questions you have in the chat feature. The VR works really well. I made sure I put in a VR lesson if you actually have a mobile device or a tablet so you can walk around. So if you have another device that is like a phone or an iPad actually, or a tablet works really well too, you can actually go to nearpod.com and actually just type in where it says student-led the student sign-in is QELSZ. Now what I love about Nearpod for primary is when they're entering QELSZ, it doesn't matter if it's lowercase or uppercase, it'll work regardless. So that's important. But the other thing I love about it is that the student, with privacy issues, the students aren't creating accounts. You are creating an account as an educator, and then the students are just literally going to that website, and they're just entering that code to have access to the lesson. The other thing you can do is you can actually flip your classroom. So you can have a Nearpod, let's say for homework, for those of you who are in junior with the concept. You'll have some assessment tied into there, so you'll know exactly how the students are doing before they walk in the door, and then you can basically design your lesson based on that. As well as you can differentiate it. So if you have students working at different grade levels, you can give them different codes for different lessons. So I've done this with writing. Let's say I have a group of students that needs to work on writing, topic sentences. Another student needs to work on punctuation. I can give one group one code, and they're working on that on certain devices, and another group that's working, let's say, on one code and another set of something else that they need to work on with their writing. So there's that differentiation piece as well. But I will say that the VR component is phenomenal, and we did one this year where in grade 3 we studied structures, and we went on a world tour. So we went to the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and we went to the Taj Mahal, and we went to Rome. We saw the Colosseum. And essentially it was just me entering different slides, and the engagement was incredible. So I'll give you a minute to just explore that on your devices. And again, any questions, just post them in the chat. The other thing is, even after the session is over, you can continue to engage with the Nearpod lesson because the code stays active. So even if you want to try this out later on, you can definitely do that as well. So I'm going to move on to our next tool, which is a Canadian company, and it's KnowledgeHook. Again, the bullet points are the reasons I really love this platform. And it's a Canadian-based company out of Waterloo whose platform is math-focused and whose mission is to empower mathematics students and teachers through exemplary curriculum, professional development, and leadership. And I've been using this platform now for about 2 years. And what I love about it is that it's focused on the Ontario math curriculum. And it's very specific, it's highly engaging for students, and it's really helped me to try to create a balanced math program. And as you know, as Ontario educators, math is a huge concern right now, and I know what a lot of schools are targeting and focusing on in raising their mathematical EQAO scores and such, and just I think creating this focus on STEM, etc. Michelle has posted a link into the platform, so you can have a look at it, as well as this is what it will look like when you go to the actual website. I've put in basically just a screenshot for you to view. There are 2 methods for students to participate. There is a free game show method, so you can sign up today where you will launch the lesson and students answer using their own devices. Again, it works on cross-platform, which is why I brought it into the BYOD session. It basically functions a lot like a Kahoot, except students will see the questions on their devices. It won't just be the 4 squares. The questions are already in the program, so you do not have to write them yourself. Although you don't have to use this for math, you can design questions for history, basically any topic you want. There's also a paid missions method, and currently that's about $34.99 per teacher for a school year. But a lot of school boards are actually signing up to use this tool across the board. So you might see it as well with your board. It's something to look into. Here's what I see as a teacher. And what I love is the questions are based on Ontario math expectations, and they are very well written. So as a teacher, I would click on the strand I'm looking for, and I would click on the expectations I want to address. So here I've chosen 3M11, represent, compare, and order whole numbers to 1,000 using a variety of methods, and there's 9 questions. Now I can choose to use those, I can change it, I can write my own as well. And I can also differentiate and assign different grades for different students. So if I have a student working if I'm in grade 6 at a grade 5 level, I can assign a grade 5 level. I can assign a grade 4 level if a student is working at a grade 4 level in math, etc. And I can differentiate those questions. The student will not necessarily know that they're getting different questions. It will just appear in their file when they're logged on. Again, like Nearpod, privacy issues, you are creating the account as an educator, and all the students have to do is enter they sign up through your account essentially, and it's just a first name, and there's not a collection of personal information. This is an example of a specific question, what the students would see. Each participant will have a different random order of questions on their device. Feedback is instant for the student, which is, again, critical. So that's what I love about this. It's great. They get that instant feedback. And then I can also save the results as well, so I can see them as an educator. I can put that into my assessment binder. There are multiple choice and short answer questions. And they also have provided built-in manipulatives, such as the calculator for students, as well as we were doing one with the number line, for example, and they could jump on the number line and use that to help them answer the question. With Mission, students actually have the option to try questions again and again, so they can raise their scores. So there's a real growth mindset, which is built into the program. And there's also no timepiece. So like one of the things about a Kahoot is that it is time-based, which can be fun, but for mathematics in general, I think it creates a lot of stress. I don't like to have that time component there. And students do get points for answering correct questions, and they can level up. So particularly, there's like this game-based element to the program that students really, really love. Here's the other part that I love as well as an educator, and that is that I get a report. And here's an example of a report on how my class is doing, and I can click on further to see, particularly go in and see what questions they struggled with and what those misconceptions were and where I need to maybe pull some students to do some guided work with. So I'll show you what that looks like. So this is an example of some of the expectations I've covered, and students are working at their own level. And I love the discussion piece going on. So I hear students, asking each other, discussing questions. That math talk is so rich, and that's what this platform provides, and it's great to see. So here's an example of when I click on a particular student, it tells me exactly what the student can do and what the student is struggling to do. Again, that's really powerful information for me as an educator. And then what I usually will do is I will take those students that are struggling with the concept, and I'll work with them in a guided group. Maybe the other students are working on KnowledgeHook, maybe they're working on another activity, but it's very, very powerful. And here's something that I used just the other day with when I was doing money, which is it gives me a background on why students are struggling and gives some documentation. And again, I can definitely share that out with the student, but I can also share that out with the parents. You also do have the opportunity to share out results with parents as well, so they can sign up and they can receive notifications on how their child is doing as well. So that is also an option within KnowledgeHook as well. And then another piece that is unique to this program is that students can actually upload pictures to show their thinking. So this is an example that a student uploaded of how they basically got to the answer. And it's great for conversations, seeing misconceptions, showing multiple representations to problems. This is just one simple sample from class last year. Students love sharing their solutions, I find, in grade 3, and when I pull them up to share with the class, they get very excited to share their thinking, and then I have them expand on what they've done. And the other neat thing is if students complete enough of the program, the teacher will, they call it a half mathlon. So when you complete a half mathlon, I actually received a flag at the school, and the students who completed that got to sign it. And for the students who complete the majority of the program, about 90% of the curriculum, they receive a mathlon medal, which is mailed to the school. And I know at some schools they make this a big thing and they do it into an assembly and they come up in front. It's another incentive for students who enjoy the game-based aspect of the program and really just celebrate the great math that's going on in a classroom. So this has come up a little bit in the session. I know a lot of people are really familiar with Kahoot. Kahoot is also a web-based program, so it works well on all devices, and it's a collection of questions on specific topics. It's created by teachers, students. I've seen it used in businesses and as well, and it's in real time. You're given basically, you can be given a poll, a quiz, or a survey question. So I know today for fun we did one for Halloween. Michelle's put a link on so you can check it out. As well as there is a group-based way to play. So for example, that's what I did today with BYOD. We only had about 6 devices today in the classroom, so we went in groups of 3, and the students played a Halloween, do you know the history of Halloween Kahoot? And you know, they've also just recently introduced that you can assign a Kahoot as homework. So I did check that out. It does require an app, however. So in order for the students to complete it, it is only on an app. So I'm hoping that's something they do change. It is highly engaging if you've ever participated in a Kahoot. And again, the results can be saved. You can save them as an Excel sheet, etc., to your file, so you have that feedback. I find it is extremely useful for assessment for learning and assessment as learning as well. And a lot of schools are working with Office 365 or the G Suite. These are ways also as well, like we were talking about earlier, do you provide that direction or do you let students choose? Using either of these tools, they can demonstrate their learning. So for example, a Microsoft Sway, which is like an e-newsletter, is one way. For example, a student could create a poster, a digital poster with their device. Google Slides or PowerPoint is another option as well for students to show their learning. I really believe that differentiation is key based on what the students are interested in and needs. I like to show, I'm lucky that we have both of these suites at my school board, and I've tried to make sure that I show the students a little bit of both of them. And then as we progress in the year, give them the choices to demonstrate their learning through whatever platform they're finding most beneficial to them. I also like assigning a Google form or a Microsoft form for assessment purposes or for self-assessment. And those work extremely well as well, just to get feedback on how students are doing. So we did one at the beginning of the year after a couple weeks, and it was just, how are you enjoying the class? It was a multiple choice. What's something you think you're doing well, and what's something you think you can improve? Again, you create a QR code, and then students can just scan that in to complete it. Our health action team right now, the teacher has created a QR code as well, and the students will just scan the QR code and fill out her survey for her so she can get that feedback as well. In blogging, so blogging is a great way to integrate student voice, and 2 platforms that are extremely useful for elementary students are EduBlogs and KidBlog, although they are not free. So I've been using KidBlog now for about 5 years with my grade 3 students, and I've used it with grade 2 students as well. And I know that Kathy Cassidy, who's a phenomenal Ontario educator, or not Ontario, but Canadian educator, she, with her grade 1s, has used EduBlogs before as well. I know Michelle's going to copy a link to my blog, which I'm going to let you take a look at. KidBlog does not require an app, so students can log in from an iPad or tablet, and I've had students log in with Chromebooks as well without many problems, and some of them actually tell me they prefer to type on their iPads, which I have found interesting. So I have it set up, if you look at it, that I moderate the comments and I moderate the posts, so nothing will actually go up until I've basically read through and make sure that it is okay to be up, including guest comments. And it provides an authentic audience and really allows me to use it as a digital portfolio and show growth as well. So I'll give you a couple minutes to take a look at that. And if you have any questions about it, feel free to post that in the chat. So again, if you have any questions about blogging, feel free to reach out and take a look at our blog as well. And it is, pretty straightforward. I can't recommend it enough. It's just a great tool. So I think, as we discussed, BYOD in primary is an opportunity to teach students to balance use technology in their lives. And a lot of the stories we hear about banning BYOD tends to come from high school and upper elementary, and I've even seen that in my own experiences as an educator, as a tech coach as well, working in the schools. And I really feel like if we do some of the work at the earlier level, and if that is consistent from year to year, then as the students get older, I question whether we would have so many of the behaviors and things that we're seeing, some of the less effective habits that we're witnessing with our older students. I find because they haven't necessarily been taught these habits, that's the expectation. And I think if we look at ourselves even as adults, as educators, and when we're in a meeting and when our attention is being pulled to look at our devices, and why is that? And sometimes it's because we have emergencies going on, or we're waiting for something, or worried about something going on. And I don't think that our students are any different sometimes. So I think that the key is to question why the students are off their devices. And also, if we consistently carried over from year to year with modeling and working on these behaviors and using the devices for educational purposes, I question how could an intermediate or senior class look different. So when our students are off task, I think we need to ask ourselves why that is, and maybe address some of these questions. And I think digital balance is key. One of the things I'm very cautious of, especially in elementary, a grade 3 teacher, is it's not about tech all the time. I'm a parent as well, and digital balance is so key. So when I'm posting things on Twitter, I'm trying to create that balance. Like, we're still reading books, we're still writing on paper, we're still working collaborative groups, we're still outside, we're still doing yoga or playing games, we're still working as a team. And so there's a time where technology is great in the classroom, and there's a time where it needs to be put away, and it shouldn't be used all the time. So I think that's something that I really try and communicate to my parents, and I really try and share that out as well with the larger world on Twitter. So I want you to, if you could use, it's the last tool, the clip art tool, and put a little check mark. Again, you can use the chat box. After listening to some of the tools that we've talked about, maybe which ones are you most excited to try or learn more about that we've discussed? So I'll give you a minute to think about that and put your question marks on the chart there.
So you go to the bottom icon and you select one of the icons that is offered to you. You drop it on the screen, and Tandis, you can let us know. Okay, you wrote KnowledgeHook. Okay, great. I think KnowledgeHook is a great application. I've seen it a few times, and it's really a good application. And I think that if we get lots of requests regarding these applications, we could always do a follow-up session where we go into more details into one or two or three of these applications to learn more about a bit more of how to use them and how to actually apply them in real situation.
I think one of the great things about KnowledgeHook is that it is a Canadian-based company and that the expectations link directly to mathematics. And one of the things that I've reached out to the company and spoken to them about is that they're telling me that they're continuing to build their platform. So one of the things that's going to be coming down is math portfolios and more remediation and more, like, they're really rooted in pedagogy. So I'm really excited to see where that platform will continue to grow. So thank you for participating in that. And just to have a chance, what are your BYOD ideas or activities? I'm sure that you have your own ideas, or maybe you've tried something else in your classroom or in your experiences as an educator. So if you have a minute to share that out, again, you can put them into the chat box, and you can also put them in the chat feature. Jenny, I see your comment about student blogs, and it's really exciting when the students do have responses. Right now, my students we're doing something called a student blogging challenge. And they're getting blog posts from all over the world, Australia, the United States, and they're super, super excited about reading them. And we even had a discussion today because one of the students from the United States, I think it was Wisconsin, mentioned that we spell favorite differently in Canada. We have a U, so that led to a whole mini lesson there. The other thing with blogs too is we have done a lot of lessons on how to effectively respond to a blog comment, and I've modeled that out, how to write blog posts, and it's a great way to meet writing curriculum expectations as well. So there's some great ideas on here, presentations, s'mores. S'mores are as well very similar to a sway. Padlets are amazing. Epic Kids books are great ebooks options as well. I'm not familiar with the French book app, but I will definitely check that out. Thank you for sharing that. Flipgrid is amazing as well. We actually did a Flipgrid with for the Global Real, which we're participating with another class in, and my students absolutely loved it. So it's a great way for students to share orally, absolutely, and mirroring for sure. That's one of the things I like about Nearpod. If a student answers an answer in Nearpod, I can actually share out their responses. It can be anonymous or not anonymous with the entire class. So when you ask a question in a class, you might get 5 or 6 hands, but with Nearpod, it really does require 100% participation when you ask a question, and you'll know exactly which students are answering and not answering it on your device. The great thing is if you have an iPhone, you can actually launch the lesson from your phone, and you can walk around the room and see who's participating and who's answered and who's struggling. I don't have an iPhone, but I do use my iPad, and it's basically I'm not tethered to my computer as I'm launching my project, or my lesson. So I really do love that aspect of it as well. And I can see somebody here, Megan, is loving Nearpod. I agree. It is awesome. And you don't need an app to run it, so the teacher again launches it, and it's web-based. And I really love integrating student voice into BYOD. So I asked one of my students in a very short little interview to give me her opinion on why BYOD is so important or what she felt about it. So she made this little video, and I know Michelle's going to put the link in the chat feature so you can click on it and you can hear Sadie's experiences. I actually did this presentation at ISTE in the summer, and she came via Skype during the presentation and shared out some of the things that we were working on. And so I'll give you a second to have a listen into a student's opinion of why BYOD can be a very positive experience as a grade 3 student. So I know that some of you might not be familiar with creating a QR code board in your class. I know that that usually is something a lot of teachers can get started. It's something you can start doing tomorrow with your students. This is just a how-to of how to do that. And one of the questions I typically get is, what website did you use to make the QR codes? So the one that I use, because it is free and it is easy to work with, is the qrcodegenerator.com. And essentially, you can have the students take a link, the link that they want. You would paste it in this in the little box on the website, and just hit create QR code, and it'll generate it. And then you would save it, and then you can print it. I like to import it into a Word document and then just put a title. It's also great if you're doing media projects, even posters. We have a bulletin board that we're doing on climate change, and we actually created a little video, and we put the link to the video because it's digital, and created a QR code. So when you go by the board, or if the students are creating media projects, they can scan the QR code, and it just makes your media project that much more interactive. There is Karen Messing, if you Google her, she has a I know we're running a little bit low on time, but Michelle can put the link in. She created this wonderful idea for looking for ways to use QR codes in your classroom, scavenger hunts, etc. It's a couple years old, but it's just a really great tool. I actually, when I start off teaching QR codes to my grade 3 students, I actually have them take a look at the beginning of this video, because it basically says what QR stands for, how it evolved, where it came from. So it's a really great video just to watch as a reference, both for us and our students. One of the students who downloaded the QR code this week reader, who was so excited and came to me and said, "Look, I've got it on my own device." She's like, "And did you know I can scan milk products and things in my house?" And there's all kinds of things I'm noticing about QR codes. So that's another great video that you can check out as well. It's about 4 minutes, so you can watch on your own. Just before we end, because I do want to give some time for questions, if you have any final thoughts or questions or comments, any remarks, please feel free to either post that in the chat, or you can post that as well on our board using the text tool with the A, and I'll give you a minute to do that. So great question. I do actually have a slide, which I will put on for digital citizen resources. And that is Common Sense Media has some great videos. On my blog, I also have some. Some are more targeted for intermediate senior. Tumble Books, if you have a chance I know I live in the city of Mississauga, we have access to Tumble Books for free through our library, and some school boards have it. There's Little Red in Cyberspace, which is a parody of Little Red Riding Hood. I always watch that one, and then there's another one as well in there. Great books to watch with young students and have a conversation before making those charts. There's also Brain Pop. Now, Brain Pop, you do have to pay for it, but they have a free digital etiquette video, and it's a good one as well to share. And the OSAPAC website as well has great resources, and it's outlined by division. So there's a primary section, a junior, an intermediate, and a senior. And one of the best things you can do is also have your students create their own posters, their own videos to educate others. Even just a quick Google search of, the other day I was looking for copyright videos for my students, and I found some great examples. So having your students, let's say, make their own digital superhero. is a great lesson as well, something that they can relate to. But I'm always quite amazed at how much my students, how much schema they bring into it. And they all have stories to share as well. And I'll go back to this one if anyone has any other questions or comments. And I know Michelle's posted some of the links to some of the resources that we talked about as well. The other thing is if you pair it with, let's say, a grade 7 or 8 teacher, a great inquiry project or could be, creating these videos and working together, and even having those intermediates understand and teaching those, building those relationships around digital citizenship within your school, and then even sharing those out via assemblies or via the PA system as well as a great way to document student learning. The simplest thing you can do is have them use like the photo or the video. I use Explain Everything as an app right now. We're using one where we were working with the Matthews website. They have a money one. We were doing money, so they were showing with the money one how to make, let's say, $5.35. They would take a picture with that on their iPad and then import that into Explain Everything. But Explain Everything is a great one for documenting student learning. Flipgrid, which also came up, I think Megan mentioned that, is one of my new favorite ones. Basically anything that can record audio. Adobe Voice is really great. Book Creator, somebody mentioned, works really well as well. So there's lots out there to document student learning. And so I hope that answers that question. Any final questions? So thank you very much for coming out. I know it's a very busy week with Halloween tomorrow and different things going on at different schools. Please feel free to reach out after the webinar. I'm on Twitter. The first one's, again, my professional handle, and my personal, the second one is our classroom handle. And if you have any questions or if you feel free to reach out and keep in touch. And thank you so much for taking the time today to share your time and your learning with me.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Vicki. Thanks for sharing your enthusiasm and your expertise with us. And it's just 9 o'clock, so you did it perfectly right to the second, almost. I must tell all of you that Vicki did a ton of research for this session, and there are many more links that Vicki shared with us. We couldn't go through everything tonight, but we will send you all these links and all these resources tomorrow. You will receive an email with all that information. And there are also a few bonus slides that you can see here that we couldn't review. Some of them we saw, but not all of them. And you will also get a copy of all these bonus slides that we couldn't review tonight. Thanks again, Vicki. I think it was a really good session with a lot of creativity. I particularly enjoyed the opportunity that you left in your presentation for interactivity throughout the evening. I also want to thank all of you for being such incredibly motivated participants and for taking time away from your families to join us on OTF Connects. It's always wonderful to see how cooperative these OTF sessions are and how you all come along to share your experience and your ideas, etc. So I think you guys were a great group tonight. It was a small group, but definitely a great group. If you can give me 5 more minutes, I just want to share a few more things with you. It's going to be very quick. We have a particularly rich program this season, lots of very interesting sessions coming up. I warmly recommend 3 of the following sessions. On Thursday, we have an exciting presentation by Matthew Aldrich called Mathematize This, Matt is a really cool teacher and presenter. I've worked with him in the past, and his presentations are always a lot of fun. So I recommend that for Thursday. Then on November 7th, we have our first French session of the season called Building Student Confidence and Participation in FSL with Jen Rochon. That's a presentation in French. I will be moderating that presentation. So if you know any French teachers, please encourage them, because we have few French sessions every year. And then on November 13, we have a session dedicated to Google Suites with Carl Kitchen. And if you like Vicky's session tonight, you will surely love that session as well. I just want to let you know that for the moment, we're still waiting for Carl to confirm his availability for that session. So I invite you to check our calendar in the next days to make sure that this session is on November 13. I'm going to paste in the chat box the links for our calendar as well as for our past webinars and resources. So you can check that at your leisure tomorrow. I also want to let you know of another opportunity provided by OTF and the Ministry of Education. If you're a qualified teacher and have completed an additional qualification course in math, technology, or kindergarten, you may be eligible for a $450 subsidy. And I'm going to paste in the chat box the link if you want to apply for that $450 subsidy. And you will also receive that link tomorrow in the email, in the follow-up email that we are going to send you. We need your feedback. Your feedback is extremely important to us. When quitting Blackboard, you will be presented with the opportunity to give us your feedback on tonight's session, and also to fill a quick online questionnaire. The survey only takes a few minutes, so if you can do it right now, that would be greatly appreciated. You should be redirected automatically to the survey page when you quit the application. And as a new feature of our webinar, we will also offer you a certificate of participation. And so when you're finished completing the questionnaire, you will be redirected to another page allowing you to enter your name, and then you will receive a certificate of participation to this training session that you will be able to add to your professional learning resume. Please note that the certificate of participation is only available for 48 hours following this session, so we encourage you to either fill up the questionnaire tonight or tomorrow when you receive the link. I will put in the chat box the links for the feedback survey as well as for the certificate of participation in case you are not redirected automatically. You should be redirected, but just in case, here are the links. And I'm also going to paste the link for tonight's session. So it's not live yet. I will complete that page later tonight, and I will include all the links and the recording of the session, and then you will be able to access that page by clicking on the link that I just pasted in the chat box. So that's it for tonight. I just want to remind those of you who have registered that we have a seminar this weekend at the Holiday Inn International Airport on financial literacy. So unfortunately the registration has I think ended. You can still maybe go and check, but I think the registration is already closed. But for those of you who have registered, I think it's going to be a very interesting seminar this weekend at the airport. I'm now going to end the recording of the session. Feel free to remain online if you want to ask Vicki additional questions once the recording is ended. Otherwise, I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you once again for your participation in tonight's session, and we hope to see you soon on OTF Connects. Merci beaucoup à tous et bonne fin de soirée, et à très bientôt sur OTF Connects.